Okay, so we're going to continue on this road to revolution, and we're going to recap a little bit of what happened in part one before we move on to how even more problems arose between the British and the colonists. So back to the French and Indian War. Again, that was 1754 to 1763. It was the British and the colonists versus the French and the Indians. Remember, it's British and colonists on one side, French and Indians on the other. French at the beginning were winning, but then the British got a new military strategy, and it ultimately led to their victory. Results: the French are driven out of Canada and their territories west of the Appalachian Mountains. So the French, gone from North America. Impact of the war: so increased British Empire in North America. They got all of that French land that had just been won. And then there was a huge increase in British debt. It costs a lot of money to fight a war. So the King and Parliament were looking for ways to get rid of this debt, and it caused a lot of anger among the colonists. So now moving past all of that, the Proclamation of 1763 did not allow settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains for the British colonists. It was really expensive for the British to protect it, so they said, nope, we're drawing a line right down the Appalachian Mountains, don't go west of it. Again, it ticked off a lot of people. So the colonists' reaction to that, they were really frustrated. They wanted to move west. It was getting crowded in east of the Appalachian Mountains. They were like, come on, let us move. It made British control over the colonies even tighter. And they were like, wait a minute, you guys are far, far away. Why are you still controlling us so harshly? Why can't we control ourselves? So then you have the Quartering Act. So to quarter means to give shelter or a place to stay. Now, what this act did, it required the colonists to host British soldiers in their homes. They were required to provide fuel, candles, beer, transportation, basically anything that the soldiers needed. The colonists had to give it without complaint, without even being asked. They just were told, hey, look, give it now. So can you imagine, like, an American soldier just showing up on your door and you're told, guess what? You have to give him whatever you want to do. That's basically what happened to these colonists, and they're like, wait a minute. We had no say in this. This isn't fair. We can't afford this. So, again, really angry. They were very suspicious of the troops. They were afraid that they would be stolen from. They had to provide food, shelter, transportation for the soldiers, and it cost the colonists a lot of money. The colonists were saying that the soldiers were not there for protection. They were there to control the colonists, which they were not really pleased about. Think about it like if an administrator was placed in each and every classroom, which is totally impossible. But think of it, if administrators were in each classroom, you would think, hey, look, they're not here for my protection. They're here for control of us. So that was their problem there. And the colonists also thought it was a huge invasion of their personal lives and wallets. I mean, can you imagine just somebody showing up in the middle of dinner or in the middle of watching your favorite TV show and they say, look, it's my place now. I get to do what I want. You would not be very happy. That's the way these colonists felt. Okay, the Stamp Act. So it was a tax on most printed materials. So that would be like newspapers, playing cards, marriage licenses, pamphlets. Basically, everything was printed back then. I mean, think about it. How much do we come across on a daily basis that's printed? Now, we have the added benefit of a lot of electronic and digital stuff today, but I mean, think about how much that is still printed. That's everything. So that it's a pretty decent amount of money going to every single bit of printed materials. It was called the Stamp Act because the colonists had to place a stamp on the printed document to prove that they paid the tax, which did not make them happy, as you can imagine. So the colonists' reaction was that they were really angry. They felt that their freedom was threatened. Like, hey, look, why are you making me pay for everything? They ultimately decided to boycott British goods a lot. So that meant that less money was going to the British. How do you think the British felt about that? Probably not good. And then the Stamp Act Congress demanded that the act be repealed. So the colonists got together, created a Stamp Act Congress of citizens in the colonies, and they were like, look, we're done. We don't want to pay it anymore. This isn't fair because you're making us pay for stuff that's not our fault. Next, you have the Townshend Acts, which were indirect taxes on paper, tea, glass, lead, basically, again, everything. So an indirect tax is paid at the ports before items reach the store. The cost was covered by raising the price on goods. So think about it if, all Apple products, they're made overseas. They're made generally in China and stuff like that. Well, not only would you have a tax when you buy, like the new Apple iPhone 6, but there was a tax on it as soon as it entered the United States at the port. And so that jacks up the prices of the Apple iPhones even more. And Britain kind of did it like without hoping the colonies would like notice. They were like, no, they won't really care. Like, we'll just jack up the prices. Nobody's going to notice. Nobody's really going to care. Well, how do you think people really felt about that one? It caused some issues, to say the least. So again, this is on top of the Stamp Act, by the way. So not only is it taxed at purchase because it's a paper good or whatever it is, and then on top of it, it gets taxed at the port. So you're paying crazy amounts of money on these goods that you need, but all of a sudden the prices are way high. So, colonists' reaction to the Townshend Acts, very angry, thought they were unfair. They believed it was taxation without representation. Now, this is largely because the colonists had no voice in Parliament. Britain wouldn't allow them to have any voices in Parliament. Now, British counties and towns and cities and stuff over in Great Britain and England and all that stuff, they have representation in Parliament. But the colonists did not. They were not allowed to. So they said, wait a minute, you're taxing us without even giving us a voice. That's really, really unfair. So again, they started to boycott British goods. The Boston Massacre occurred March 5th, 1770. The colonists started to taunt the British troops. They were like, haha, we don't want to buy stuff from you. You can't do anything to hurt us, blah, blah, blah. Well, the troops decided to open fire after a snowball was thrown at the troops, and 5 colonists ultimately died. I strongly suggest you don't go throwing snowballs at large groups of soldiers. It just is, it's not going to work out well for anybody. So just stay away from that whole idea. But also just don't make soldiers mad when they're armed and in a group. Just not a smart idea to begin with. So the colonists' reaction to the Boston Massacre, they were livid, completely angry. They said that it was all the British fault. Like, you shouldn't have shot somebody over a snowball. You shouldn't have shot somebody over words. The colonists said, look, get these troops out of here. We don't want to quarter them. We don't want to deal with this. This is ridiculous. And then they also wanted a trial of the soldiers for murder. They were saying, look, this isn't some war. This isn't some battle. You murdered our people on the streets of Boston. What the heck? So, Boston Tea Party then happened, and it gave the British East Indies Company. So think of Pirates of the Caribbean. You've got British East India Trading Company. That is this. That actually was a real bit of history. So it gave them a complete monopoly of the American tea business. Nobody else could sell tea in the colonies. And like tea, think of it like we think of coffee today. The British and the colonists drank it all the time. So the colonists were kind of ticked because they could only buy tea from the British East India Company. Well, how would this be a problem? Well, you've got those Townshend Acts, you've got that Stamp Act, and you can't exactly boycott those British goods if you want to drink it on a regular basis. It drastically lowered the price of tea, but jacked up those taxes. The colonists' reaction to that ruling, Parliament was making a decision without coming to the colonies and asking for their opinion or what they wanted. So what they decided to do was protest. So what they did is they gathered under this group with the name of Sons of Liberty. They got together, they decided to dress up as Native Americans, and then go and raid 3 ships in Boston Harbor. Now, within that raid, they decided to throw stuff over the edge. They just decided to burn stuff. It was not pretty. Over 340 chests, actually, of tea were dumped into the harbor. So the ongoing joke was the water in the harbor was like tea for a long time. That's a lot of tea. I mean, if you think about it, like tea bags and tea packets are pretty small generally. So think about how much tea that actually is in each chest and container. That's a lot of tea. That's a lot of profits that the British East India Company lost thanks to this protest. So the Intolerable Acts were in reaction to the Boston Tea Party. Parliament was really, really ticked off. They were also known as the Coercive Acts. So to coerce means to force someone to do something. This closed the port of Boston. Nothing could come in or out. So think about it, if you just shut down a port, that's your economy entirely. It imposed a military rule on all of Massachusetts, so the military was everywhere. They got to control everything. Like, even though you had your town meetings and stuff that were running Massachusetts, not anymore. The military took control of all of that. So, legislature and town meetings, gone. The military ruled. The military was the law. Which, how do you think that these colonists were feeling at this point? So intolerable. Really, really angry. All of the colonies got really ticked off at the British, not just Massachusetts. It was the first time that all of the colonies could actually get along and agree on something. So they were like, wait a minute. Britain's crossed a line. Huge, huge line. They said it was a violation of their rights, and you had colonial Minutemen, which is kind of like a militia, to begin training for battle. They were like, look, we're done. This is ridiculous. So what they decided to do was they created the first Continental Congress. There were the representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies. They met in Philadelphia, and they came up with a Declaration of Rights, which appealed to the king and to the British people. within that, they said, look, we have rights. We are people too. We are British subjects. They also decided to have a complete boycott of trade with England. Like, nothing. Don't worry about it. We will find other people to trade with, but do not trade with England. They crossed a line. We're going to give it right back to them. Any violators of that boycott would be tarred and feathered. So, okay, think about tar. Tar makes up asphalt. So it's black, it's sticky, it's not pleasant. It has to be kept at a warm temperature. So you would have tar poured all over you, and then like they would collect duck and geese feathers, and they would be thrown on you. So can you imagine getting that off? No, it didn't happen. So it was not a pleasant experience. You just completely avoided the like you took place in that boycott. You did not do business with Britain because you did not want to be tarred and feathered. It was not pretty. So then you have Lexington and Concord. British troops marched to Lexington and Concord to seize the colonial gunpowder and arms that they had stored there. The Minutemen, they met the British troops, and it became the first armed conflict of the Revolutionary War. Casualties, for the British, you had 273. For the colonists, you had less than 100. So this was seen as a large victory for the colonists. So the colonial reaction to Lexington and Concord, thousands of Minutemen decided to gather around Boston. And then you have the Second Continental Congress meeting again in Philadelphia, and they're drafting a new appeal to the king. And they're like, look, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to create our own country. We're going to keep this Revolutionary War happening. They decided to elect George Washington to lead those Minutemen in Boston. So good old GW got sent up to Boston. And then the Revolutionary War began.